here for the first time. Last night was an interesting night with an election. When I woke up this morning, I realized that there will be a lot of new faces. It will be an interesting election season, but it did bring home something that we knew was approaching, and approaching with really some sense of regret, and that is the end of the Patrick administration, or more appropriately for the South Shore, the Patrick Bilecki administration. As I have said many times, the South Shore could not ask for a better partner in the governor's office for some of our agenda on regional planning, regional economic growth, partly with the restoration of rail, partly because of what great communities we are, partly because of some competitive advantages, all of which you will hear about, or some of which you will hear about later on by our main speaker. But it has been an enormous pleasure to work with Secretary Greg Bilecki and Governor Patrick on our initiatives, partners who understood the importance of thinking regionally, partners who worked with us as long as we are realistic about our asks and we're willing to work with them. And because of that, we have an impressive checklist of accomplishments over the last 8 years for development, including the widening of Route 18, partially the Parkway at Southfield, but certainly moving Southfield forward, including their signing the new legislation a few weeks ago. The widening of Route 139 that opens up Enterprise Park. Obviously, some of the mass transit issues we have that will lead to development. And they have been great partners. So we thought it would certainly be appropriate as we kick off this project with you on regional development to first invite Secretary Bilecki down to thank him and the governor for what they have done for the South Shore, and also to get a few words from him. We were going to have him speak later in the program, but he has to go back to Boston. I did try to persuade him that the governor's a lame duck, so he doesn't have to go back to see the governor. But he is going to go back anyway, I guess, to talk to him. So please welcome a friend of the South Shore, Secretary Greg Bilecki.
Peter, thank you very much, and it's great to be here with you, and I do apologize in advance. I want to learn more, and I will continue to learn more about the great work you're doing in the Regional Development Plan. I was down in Fall River this morning, and I do need to head back to Boston in a few minutes, but I thought I would stop by. Despite what Peter said as my reason for being here, it was my understanding from him that I was invited here this morning to explain why the regional development planning exercise you're doing is a great and important idea, and I'm glad to do that this morning. And just because time is short, just very quickly tell you some reasons why it's easy for me to say that this is a very important exercise for the region and will put you in great stead. I think especially with the new administration coming in, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the case to be made for why you all should do this, I think, is pretty simple. First is really the importance of planning ahead in economic development. I know that there's a big part of my career had been in the private sector before coming to work for Governor Patrick. Certainly, the governor and I both feel that a very important part of an effective state economic development office is to be nimble and to be opportunistic, to move at the speed of business, as you've heard the governor say. But it's terribly important, I think, that we do present to the world, to the business community here and to the business community that's not yet here, that we do have a long-term strategy. We know that on any good list of what makes a good business climate and a good business environment, the predictability of that environment is terribly important. And so it's important for the state and the region to be able to say, and for not just for an individual governor or the individual head of a chamber of commerce, but everybody in a region or a state to say, here in Massachusetts, here in the South Shore, we do have a strategy. We're all working together on this. It's a long-term strategy. There's a bunch of us working on it, so it doesn't depend on whether any particular person happens to be in any particular chair at a certain time. That's the approach that we have taken at the state. At the urging of the legislature back in 2010, we developed an economic development strategy for the state we call Choosing to Compete in the 21st Century. Some of you may be familiar with it. For those of you who are not, it's available online at mass.gov/compete. We have stuck to it, and that really has been the roadmap for the work that we have done, particularly in Governor Patrick's second term. So planning ahead is important. Also, thinking regionally is important in economic development. If you look at a map of the United States, we're not one of the bigger states geographically, we're one of the smaller states geographically. And yet if you zoom in on Massachusetts, it's very clear that we are a set of regions that have different assets, different competitive advantages, different challenges as well. And so that's pretty much from the basic playbook of economic development. I think you'll see not only Governor Patrick been thinking that way, but you may remember going back to 2003, one of the first things that Governor Romney did, a part of his economic development strategy, was to introduce regional competitiveness councils. So the idea that Massachusetts needs regional economic development strategies has been a core principle of ours and other governors for many years. But it is important, a couple of things that you're doing here that I think are going to make a critical difference. One is that it is so important that the vision and the direction for the region come from the region itself. There's a lot of work that we can do in partnership with you to give you data, to give you context for what we're seeing all across the state and how the state is viewed nationally and internationally. But if the plan is going to be successful, the region, it has to come from the region and the region has to own it. And the reason for that very simply is when you get into building economic development plans and economic development strategies, with all due respect to the great consultants you're going to hear from today, making the plan is the easy part. Sticking with the plan is the hard part. So if it's a plan that seems to come from someone else, we're telling you this, especially we on Beacon Hill, are telling you this is what you all ought to do. The chances that you're going to stick with it are much less likely. And so it really needs to come from the region if it's going to be successfully implemented. And next, it has to be a plan that really has the participation of both public and private participants. It has to really represent a consensus, a shared vision for the region. That's why when we developed our state's economic development strategy that I talked about, at the governor's request, I convened a council of 34 public and private representatives from all around the state, mostly private actually, to inform, not only to inform the work that we were doing, but in turn to get all those folks to say, this is a plan that we will stick with and we will help you and the administration to implement. So if you do a plan like this, is it going to make a difference? Is it really, how are we going to make it a plan that doesn't just sit on the shelf? How are we going to make it a plan that really does affect outcomes in this region over the next 10 years? And I actually think, as Peter alluded to, the best example of how and why that's possible is, in fact, the work that the South Shore Chamber did 2008, Peter? 7 or 8? Yeah. That was a roadmap for us. Again, that was clearly reflecting not only the views of the public officials in this region, but also of the business community about what were the infrastructure priorities for the region. And that dovetailed beautifully with the fact that Governor Patrick wanted to make the point that the infrastructure investments that we were going to make were not ends in themselves, but were means to more housing and economic development growth. So we were looking for the places where we would get the best return on our infrastructure investment in the sense of it would catalyze the most housing and economic development growth. And as Peter said, that if you look back at that document now, it really had, to my point about you got to stick with it, it really had remarkable staying power, and it literally could be a checklist, whether it's the Quincy Concourse, Derby Street in Hingham, Route 18, the Parkway, Route 139, the work that we have done followed that roadmap. And in fact, the best part of that is not just that our public investments followed that roadmap, but at all of those places that we go to, we see private investment, and our goal is not just to be matched by private investment, but really to be leveraged many times over by the amount of private investment that occurred there. In all of those cases, that's what you're seeing, a multiple of private investment that's coming along. So that has been, I think that should give you all confidence that if you do this exercise now, you will be paid attention to in the state. As Peter mentioned, obviously we're at that time where we're seeing a new administration coming in. We could raise the question, does it make sense to be doing this now and to be making your case when we're changing governors and changing administration? But again, I feel that the work you did earlier actually demonstrates it's a great time to be doing this work, because I think whoever the new governor is going to be coming in with a sense of direction of what they want to do, but is going to be hungry for understanding what are the on-the-ground opportunities that are available in different regions of the state, and to be able to present them, early next year with the fact that this is a place that has figured that out, a region that's figured that out, I think is terrific. So in addition to the value of demonstrating to the new administration that this region knows where it's going, I have to say also we've seen wonderful things in terms of it really has made a difference in the spirit of collaboration among communities. If this development, a regional development plan can demonstrate how the efforts of different cities and towns are not merely competitive against each other, but actually can create synergies, and the things that individual communities can do really do improve the region as a whole. That's very powerful. A couple years ago, we were approached, there's a lot of development activity up north of Boston on the Route 3 corridor from 128 up to 495. I was approached separately by some of the 5 communities on Route 3 about opportunities, and I said, I would be a lot more interested in what you're proposing if you showed me that the 5 of you work together, Burlington, Bedford, Billerica, Chelmsford, and Lowell, similar situation, towns and cities. And they have been working tremendously well together for the last couple years. And as the process of working together, even learning more about what those possibilities are, for example, thinking as a region about what their workforce training and education capacity is, something that for any one city or town it's really very difficult to do. So that's an encouraging example. As also, for the state's sake, why do we care if you are thinking in this organized way? It's good for you as a region if you're more successful. Why is it important to the state? And I think the answer is sort of obvious when you look at the Commonwealth. We're trying to do a lot of things to help our more economically challenged regions, but when you look at the South Shore, you look at the highly talented and educated workforce here, you've got great schools, you've got communities with a great quality of life, you're a stone's throw from Boston and Cambridge. If Massachusetts is to perform at its full potential, this is a region that ought to and need to perform at its full potential in order for us to have our most economic success. So it's important not only for you, but for all of us. So I will be glad in my 4 months left, glad to continue to work with Peter and all of you to be helpful as we can to make sure that you are setting off on the right foot, and pledge that we will do whatever we can and through the transition for you to be successful. But this is the right way to go, and I congratulate you for doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Now, with 4 months to go, that means in a few weeks you'll be free of the terrible ethics laws that send people to jail for accepting obscenely expensive gifts. So to start you on your way, we would like to present you with this crystal bowl from the South Shore Chamber of Commerce. All right. The Secretary mentioned the transportation plan we did a few years ago, affectionately known as the Sullivan Report, drafted by Joe Sullivan before he ran for mayor of Braintree, and he is with us today, and he is on our steering committee for this project. So thank you, Joe. As is Mayor Koch from Quincy, who is at the earlier meeting of our steering committee. I don't know if he was able to stay or not, but we also have from Quincy Mike McFarland from Colonial Federal during the day and the Quincy City Council at night, who is with us. So glad to see Mike here. And for those of you who get the Boston Business Journal, I don't know if it was this week or last week,
but a great spread on Joanne Simon from Cardinal Cushing. Was it this week's BBJ? A great spread. And Joanne is here today, willing to autograph copies of your BBJ if you brought them with her. But pick it up. It was a great story and a great article, so nice to have you with us. And just a program note, our Tech Connect is October 9th. That is coming up. And I think you will find that a very interesting and new program. With that, so we can get to the main event, I would like to introduce the chairman of the board for the Chamber of Commerce for this year, the president of ACOPI, Ray Belanger.
Thank you, Peter. We've been talking about the regional development program for the last several months, and you're going to be hearing a lot more about it in the months to come. It's a big project. And even for the Chamber, it's a big project, who's no stranger to taking on large projects. We decided to take this on because we understood that the South Shore is in a very fortunate position compared to many other regions, but still change is coming. In order to prepare for that change, we have to start planning now. But initiatives like this, they don't happen without champions. And the South Shore's champion for this is Bob Rivers from Eastern Savings Bank, from Eastern Bank. He's been involved with communities covering all the state. For years, Bob has been involved in several efforts around the private sector leadership to help build stronger communities. The most notable of those, I think a lot of us are familiar with, is the Lowell Plan, where Bob and Eastern Bank have been leaders in really building a stronger Lowell. He's been encouraging business leaders in other parts of the state to step up and help define their communities and really think about the future. And 2 years ago, when Bob was the chairman, Chamber Vice Chair, and last year as the chairman again, he really challenged us to take on this project. And his message was simple: build a stronger South Shore. And what he challenged us with is that this might be a difficult undertaking because it's easier to rally people around a city that's just run out of luck. But that's not the case here in the South Shore. But what Bob pointed out to us was more of the challenge is having complacency. And so this regional development project is really about what we need to do to set the tone for where the community might be in the next 10 years from now. So we've engaged Market Street Services to help us plan for the future, who we had a great meeting with this morning. And the committee is jointly chaired by 3 of the strongest leaders in the South Shore. One is Ken Quigley, who's here with us today from Curry College, Carol Bowman from Jack Conway Company, and the person I'd like to introduce now, Bob Rivers of Eastern Bank.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And Ray, thank you very much for those kind words and really the opportunity to speak to you about something that is very near and dear to my heart, as Ray had mentioned. You know, I should first point out by saying that, you know, as in anything worthwhile and large and extensive as this sort of initiative is, it takes a village. There are, of course, many people involved, and I'd want to certainly start first by thanking Peter, who has really spearheaded this effort, and because of his presence at the Chamber and his experience, it's really the single most important factor in our ability to take on this kind of initiative. You need that leadership in the Chamber. You need that leadership day to day. You need that skill set in the Chamber to drive it. I also want to thank the Chamber staff who have been involved in this integrally as well. In particular, are really brilliant, and we're so really fortunate to have him. Tom Kelly, where's Tom? Tom, who has really been on the point for this. Tom, thank you. So many past and present board members of the Chamber, our steering committee, the other 2 co-chairs, Dr. Quigley and Carol Bowman, who I'm really privileged to have to work with on this. And so thank you to so many people that make this go. So really representing all of those folks, I had a few things that I wanted to share with you today. First of all, I also want to thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving of your time to be here at this session, and know that this is going to be different than other 1144s and 744s that you've been to, because you actually have a role at this one. Other than just enjoying a nice meal or listening to an interesting speaker, we need your help. And as you see the presentation that follows, you will undoubtedly have many thoughts, suggestions, perhaps criticisms, things to offer to this process. Because again, as in all things that are good and important and big, it will take a village. So it's going to take many hands to move us forward here on the South Shore. As Ray mentioned, I've had the opportunity to be involved in community and economic development work in other parts of the state, including the Lowell Plan, and as one of the founders of the new Lawrence Partnership. Through these experiences and others, I've learned a few important lessons in building stronger communities. First, there has to be a basis of reality in what people want their communities to become. That doesn't mean that they're not ambitious and that they're not transformational in their vision, because they should be. But they know what their strengths and their opportunities, as well as their limitations, are. Secondly, the actions taken need to be local and focused, but not isolated from our surrounding geography or done in a vacuum of how regional factors influence local action. Third, there needs to be, and it's really represented by so many people in this room, there really needs to be a critical mass of leaders who are willing to identify a challenge and lead it. And finally, that leadership needs to be collaborative between the private, nonprofit, and public sectors, but should be tilted towards the private sector. The private sector must lead this initiative for it to be ultimately effective and self-sustaining. The primary reason for this is that although so much of what has to be done will be done by government, will be really supported as it is today by the nonprofit sector, the private sector adds two critical dimensions that are often impossible for government and nonprofit to achieve, of course, on their own. First, the private sector is really naturally better equipped to narrow the scope and sharpen the priorities. The very nature of government is to be holistic and solve multiple problems. The private sector is generally more effective at focusing upon the most critical economic development priorities than building new platforms to solve other problems. Secondly, the private sector has the flexibility and the means to drive some of the solutions that government does not have due to ever-changing political winds and administrations. This is a long-range plan, and as Secretary Bielecki pointed out, you got to stick with it. And this is really the element that the private sector brings, that ability to stick with it, that kind of continuity to move these priorities forward consistently over a long period of time. The South Shore has two very different challenges than other communities taking on projects like this. The first is that it is a regional initiative encompassing many municipalities as opposed to a single city like Lowell or Lawrence. If our focus was a small, tightly defined area like a downtown, it would be much easier, not easy, but much easier to identify the problem and the solution, as well as implement the action plan. That is, see a traffic jam at one intersection and then show what happens to traffic flow with lights at the intersection or moving parking spaces somewhere else, or perhaps adding a bike lane. See some blighted Main Street and empty storefronts and show some designs for new streetscapes and signs for new stores. See an empty commercial building and show what happens when a new business comes to that area and what it means. You know, I'm oversimplifying this, of course, and many of these challenges are inherent within the regional initiative that we are embarking on today. But the questions we need to address and answer on the South Shore are broader and much more complex. They include, how do you show the improved quality of life by bringing new jobs closer to where people live in order to shorten the obnoxious time they spend in rush hour traffic? How do you develop more affordable housing options so people can actually stay near those jobs and move closer to them and actually afford to live there? How do you show the potential elevation of wealth in an area by expanding a retail economy into a broader economic base? You know, our second major challenge in undertaking this effort is perhaps even more formidable than that of facilitating consensus, collaboration, and cooperation among multiple interests across multiple cities and towns as we tackle these complex issues. Simply put, that challenge is complacency. It is much easier to mobilize action when there is an obvious and pervasive weakness, as there still is in Lowell and as there is in places like Lawrence and other economically challenged gateway cities. As you know, the South Shore is one of the nicest regions in all of the country. Our residents are generally well off, with plenty of opportunities for personal and professional growth and enrichment. Our schools are among the best in the Commonwealth, and our neighborhoods are among the most desired. We are so incredibly fortunate to live here. So, it is very easy to say, why don't we just leave things the way they are? Indeed, we can do nothing. It'd be a lot easier in some ways. But with or without some plan and direction, we won't be the same region 20 years from now. Whether we are stronger or weaker really does depend on us here in this room and so many others outside of this room, and it is this chamber that for decades has set the pace for regional priorities and building a stronger region. And we are fortunate to have partnered with a highly experienced and capable firm to help us think through our challenges and opportunities. For nearly 17 years, Market Street Services has helped more than 150 communities and regions in over 34 states develop successful strategies to grow not only their economies, but their communities. In fact, one of the main demonstrations of the value that they bring to this process that led us to select Market Street was that they begin their approach to economic development with the people who live in an area and by building strong communities, those with lots of affordable housing options to attract people, strong schools, a rich talent base, and many other attributes that we possess here on the South Shore before going forward and building stronger economies. We also like the fact that they have done a lot of work outside of New England, as I mentioned, which we believe will bring a fresh set of eyes through which we might see ourselves. Before starting Market Street Services in 1997, Mac Holliday had 25 years of experience working in economic development for large chambers of commerce in 3 states and with governors in 3 states as a senior government official. Please join me in welcoming the founder and CEO of Market Street Services, Mac Holliday.
Thank you very much, Bob. It is sincerely our pleasure to be here, and was delighted to hear what the Secretary had to say in terms of this effort and what they have done and the importance of it. As was stated, I have spent my adult life in this work. My mother used to say when she was still alive, "I'm not sure what the boy does, but I think he's a migrant worker." In fact, I have been the state director in 3 different states, working for 4 governors and 3 chambers, as was mentioned. And we have been very fortunate at Market Street to be able to help some of the most dynamic and great places in the country, as well as large and small, as we'll talk about in a minute. Let me tell you what I'm going to try to cover with you today, and bringing you up to date on where we are with this great steering committee that we're working with, which, as was mentioned, met this morning for an extended time and worked through the competitive assessment, which I'm going to talk a bit about. Let me offer, though, some context about things and the realities of what we're facing today in this economy. First of all, I want to tell you that we have an amazing cartoonist at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. His name is Mike Lukovic. Here is a cartoon with the car off the cliff, The bottom is the sign there. The people are in the car saying, "Are we there yet?" The sad news about this cartoon is that Mike published it on November the 4th of 2008. And I can assure you we still have parts of the country that are wondering if we're there yet. Have we really begun to turn the corner in terms of where we want to be economically? I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. So, in fact, any time that someone says something about the king, for those of you not old enough, that's Elvis, then I have to read it and be part of it. And one of the people who is, if not the best business writer in America, the most traveled business writer, is Thomas Friedman at the New York Times. Friedman wrote a column called "Elvis Has Left the Mountain." And if you look at this quote, what you'll see is that he said without any doubt that there was no magic bullet or bailout, that this was going to be different from anything we had ever seen. The most important word in the quote is uncertainty. And while some of our highly paid economists were telling us that the recession was over or that things would be back to normal, in fact, Friedman was right. It is that uncertainty that has been so difficult. Perhaps this slide shows you better than anything I could say about how different this is from the last 6 recessions. It has only been in the last 60 days that we have gotten back to the number of jobs that we had before the recession started nearly 6 years ago. The fact is, too, when you subtract the public sector jobs, particularly 300,000 teachers that we have fired around the country, what you see is that we're still not back there. There are more of these jobs that are now part-time than ever before. And the impact on people around the country has been dramatic. We see that the unemployment rate has dropped, and so has the labor force participation rate, as so many people have dropped out of the economy. And we still have 34% of people who've been out of work for 6 months or more. And the fact is, too, that it's been particularly harsh on young people. In fact, the unemployment rate for those 25 to 34, or 18 to 25, is double the U.S. average at 12.5%. We see, too, more people on public assistance than ever before, not because they want to, but that we see now 47 million people having to ask for food stamps in terms of doing the very best that they can. We've seen the poverty rate continue to increase to 15%, and actually a loss in the median household income across the country in terms of where we were before the recession started. Last year, Jeff Immelt, the CEO of General Electric, made a speech in which he said this: "This economic crisis doesn't represent a cycle, it represents a reset. It's an emotional, raw, social reset. People who understand that will prosper, and those who don't will be left behind." I can tell you that, in fact, he's right. This was not a cycle. This economy is very different from the one that we had in the 90s and the early parts of the last decade. So it must be that we think about things differently and what's coming and what kind of jobs and what's possible there. Let me stop for just a second and tell you a little bit about our firm. As was mentioned, we were started in 1997. We are located in Atlanta, Georgia, primarily because of the wonderful airport there and the fact that we're nonstop to the world. The reality is, too, that our company only does this work. We only do community and economic development strategy work. We have 13 people in our company. I have 2 of their great staff with me today, Alex Perlstein and Matt DeVoe, who are working on this project with us and have worked all over the country. As was mentioned, we have really been from coast to coast, both state strategies and many regional strategies for cities of all sizes. Our current workload is really driving everyone crazy in the fact that we are really all over the place. In addition to South Shore, we're working in Charlotte, Indianapolis, Nashville, Portland, St. Petersburg, San Marcos, and Tulsa. So in fact, we get a look at what is happening out there every day across the country to see the realities of the differences of what's happened to people. And I want to echo what was said about the fact that you have so many assets and you have come through this recession in better shape than so many others. But let me tell you a little bit about why I think this is exactly the right time for you to be doing this. Building on what the Secretary said, the Great Reset has changed the rules of the game. It is, without question, a moving target. There are only two ways to go, forward and backward. The economy does not stop. It keeps going. So the ability to optimize your competitive position is, as he said, and as Bob said, a team sport. There is no question about that. It takes different kinds of strategies than we used to use. It's the goal to build on what you have, to try and grow your own, and to try very much to expand what you have. In fact, this is a word cloud from one of our clients about what are the issues here? What do people care about? Each community is different, but as you can see, there are many issues. It's not about one thing. It's about a number of things. I would tell you without question that the number one issue in this work today and tomorrow is the quality of the workforce. There is nothing else more important. The second issue is the quality of place. What kind of choices do you have? What kind of place is it that makes people feel welcome? We're going to talk a bit more about that, and in fact, we believe that's one of your great strengths. It is, too, to understand that community and economic development has many pieces, that it comes together in different ways for different people and different places, and we have to look at all of them. This steering committee will make hard decisions as we move forward. Remember, too, that it's a team sport. We are delighted at the leadership of this chamber and its many partners. The fact is that that's what's required. As was mentioned, it takes all three, private, nonprofit, educational, everyone moving in the same direction. So, in fact, what we see is that regions are the new geography out there, that what we have seen in this past year is for the first time metro areas in the country consumed all of the job growth. Our rural areas actually went backwards. So, in fact, what we did was to take a look and to create a special geography for you all. Certainly one of the things that you have that's powerful are your enormous assets in terms of post-secondary education, and as I mentioned, they play a great role in the possibilities for the future of your workforce in keeping it and moving it forward. Let me say, too, that the creation of this region, in talking about what was there, in talking about how it works together, really was kind of fascinating for us. And we look through and see what's really there and what all these pieces are as we looked at the highways and we looked at trying to create what the region really is and what's there. And we think that we've gotten it right in terms of the pieces of the puzzle and where, in fact, these possibilities are for you to move forward together. Last year, there was a very important book written by Bruce Katz and Jennifer Bradley at the Brookings Institute. It was called The Metropolitan Revolution, and it talked about the fact that the real leadership in this country was coming from cities and towns and metropolitan areas that were working together. And again, Thomas Friedman was right there with a column last July talking about his cut on the book, and he titled it, I Want to Be a Mayor. Because what we see across this country is, if you will, an inversion of power in the country, that the hard work and tough decisions are being made at the local level, that's where the leadership is coming from much more so, and it's difficult for me to say this as a previous state director in 3 states, but less from the state and virtually not at all from the federal government. So what they have described is the future of what's going on there. We know too, as I said a minute ago, that the skilled workers of tomorrow are going to go to a place first and then find a job. It's a real change from those of us who went from place to place in terms of our work. The reality is too, as was mentioned, it is that mix of housing, it is that possibility for young professionals to find a place that they like and they want to stay. And it's interesting to see very clearly the differences in where people are moving and what's going on there. The Urban Land Institute has just finished a report which looks at what Generation Y says. And you can see that nearly 60% of them want to be in the city or right on the edge in the suburbs, completely different from the baby boomers, where the numbers were much, much smaller. We see this trend only increasing, and yet it gives you great advantage and great possibilities in terms of what you can do. We've already seen some really interesting walkable mixed-use districts around Boston that have taken place and are moving forward. And again, there are great opportunities here in terms of the different realities, but we've got to get together and talk about how to take advantage of them. Here is one of them, obviously, in talking about all the pieces of the different projects that are possible around this region. The sites are different in terms of Quincy's Marina Bay, Hickman Shipyard, Plymouth Cordage, Quincy Shipyard, the landing at Braintree and Weymouth Line. In terms of all of those things that are possible, as a former Navy pilot, I was particularly interested in this one, in thinking about the possibilities of what could be there. So, in fact, here's what we've embarked upon, the strategy process that I'm going to mention to you. As the Secretary mentioned, all successful places are public-private partnerships. The steering committee today was a very powerful meeting. They are together. They get this. They are really committed to making the good and tough decisions. So we began with some fundamental questions about what do you want this place to be? Is it to be a collection of bedroom communities, or is it to be a dynamic economy? Is it to be diverse, or are we going to remain, as was mentioned, on the retail side of the house? Are we willing to really think about what our shortcomings are and improve the standing in all the pieces that we know require us to be competitive across the world? Can we operate as a region on the key strategies and initiatives given the realities of this governance system in the Commonwealth? So that is to suggest there are challenges, but there are ways to do it. And this process is part of that. It takes time. It's 10 months long. We started with a blank piece of paper, and yet understand the existing efforts that are underway. We are getting on a moving train. There is no question about that. And yet it is designed, this process is designed with implementation in mind. Because as was said, that's when the hard work starts. And the people in this room are the people that are going to be responsible for that. It's a team sport. We have to keep building the momentum through these processes. We've worked on hard the competitive assessment, which we delivered the draft of today. We move then to the target analysis and talk about what's possible in terms of the pieces of the puzzle that might come together in the two research pieces to lead us to what might be in this strategy, representing the what of making this the most competitive place it can be in terms of the new economy, blending those talent and community and place factors, all of that being realistic and achievable, but reaching, if you will, a bit for the stars in terms of what can be done. The committee will spend a great deal of time on implementation, on the how of how to do this. It will require more resources. It will require prioritization, partnerships, new collaboration, new structures, metrics, benchmarks to be measured yearly and beyond in terms of what do we want this to be about. I encourage you to look at this website, to be engaged with it as you were challenged earlier, to participate and let us hear from you and let Peter and the staff hear from you. As we go through this, the things will be posted and they'll be available for people to see and discuss. Let me very briefly talk to you a little bit about what we found in the competitive assessment. What we did was to take both the quantitative analysis of all the data and look at it, and then in fact include a serious amount of qualitative input of what people think. 8 focus groups, over 20 interviews, 300 responses to a survey in creating what people really think about it and what's there. What we suggested to the steering committee this morning is that the story has 2 parts. that there are, in fact, two ways to view what's going on here. The first is those things that unite us as a region, and the second is those things which are differences and in some ways make it more difficult, as was mentioned a bit earlier in terms of that piece. We think, however, that the strengths are on the top side of this in terms of what unites it. It's interesting, too, that we've already blown up some myths. There's some people that think that this area is growing radically fast. That is not the case. That is not what happened during the Great Recession. It grew almost not at all, and it is not growing as fast as the Boston metro area or the rest of the United States. It's interesting, too, that yes, it is growing, but it's not perhaps what some folks thought. This is a very well-educated region. You know that, both in terms of Boston metro and here in South Shore. Very strong compared to the U.S. average, with well over 40% of the people with a college degree versus 29% at the U.S. average. We think, too, that this is probably one of your strongest assets. And at the same time, what we see is some dangerous notes in the age composition. What is beginning to happen is that older people are making up a higher percentage of the local population. Nearly 30% of the population is 45 to 64, while only 24% is 25 to 44. An over 5% gap forces you to face a major competitive threat in the next number of years if you do not have further in-migration by young residents who are willing to come here and stay here, or willing to go to school here and then stay here, or come from other places. So, in fact, the competition for young professionals is an important part of what this region needs to do and needs to face up to. It's interesting, too, that even on the employment index side of the house, you have lagged behind in these past 10 years. The structure of these 25 municipalities reveals that the strongest sector is healthcare, followed by the public sector and white-collar service jobs. Again, what we've got to do is look for diversification that adds to the wealth, that adds to people's capacity, and looks at the economy in a very different way as it continues to change. One of the real difficulties, it's not a magic formula in terms of what you know, is that the number of people that are commuting 45 minutes one way has risen by 2% in the last 10 years compared to just 0.5% U.S. What is happening still is that 65,000 workers from this region go to Boston every day, and only 12,800 come back. That is to suggest from Boston to here. So the net outflow is 52,000 plus. That's not a healthy future in terms of growing your own economy. The reality is, too, that with all the efforts that have been made, there is not the prospect that the situation related to traffic is going to get a lot better. Let me also say, without question, that we work in no place that is progressive and moving forward and doing a good job that does not have traffic issues. Where we live happens to be the poster child of terrible planning. So many of, I'm sorry?
I'm going to ask you to yell to overtake the kitchen.
Oh, the kitchen's fine. They're good people there. They're working hard. The reality is that what we see, whether it's Austin or Nashville or Atlanta or wherever, that if you have a strong economy, there are traffic issues. But the point you don't want to get to is that the one where people say, I've had enough, I'm done. I can't stay here anymore. I can't do this. So the realities of changing the mix and where people are going and why they're going and creating more work, play, live places here is a real challenge of what's there. Let me tell you the story about one place that we've worked for now 12 years, and that's Austin, Texas. They got complacent. They stopped doing anything about 15 years ago. No program, no working, just kind of let things sit there. We subsequently have done 3 strategies for that 5-county region, which is Metro Austin. We started back in 2003. They had lost 25,000 jobs, paying $80,000 a job. Their per capita income had dropped $1,800 a person. in-migration stopped completely. They had no housing construction. So in fact, the business community got together and said, we got to do something about this. So we began the long way back, talking about what a wonderful place it was to live, about the changing demographics, about what they could do. That became Opportunity Austin 1, which was the first process that we worked on with them and really began the transformation of that region to where it is today. They capitalized on their business retention efforts. They stimulated their economy through research. They marketed better. They improved the competitive place with education, quality of life, changing their regulations at the city in terms of process and across the counties. Subsequently, over these years, what we have seen is a tremendous change in what's there. The Opportunity Austin 3.0 is a program of 5 years, the third one that we've done with them. The budget is $25 million. So if you want to play in the game, it's not inexpensive. If you want to be a leading region, you have to get in there and fight for it. Austin has learned how to do that. They are really a place that in some ways is very proud of the most sold t-shirt they have, which is Keep Austin Weird. I often say in speeches around the country that Austin has the best educated waiters in America. 26% of their population went to the University of Texas and got a degree. 45% of their population has a degree from somewhere. And young people are coming from all over the world to live there first and find a job next. The thing we're proudest of with them is their strong and continuing implementation. They're doing it every day with staff and volunteers working together across these 5 counties with multiple organizations being led by the Chamber. I want to share one other thing with you about that. Here are the metrics that their steering committee decided on for this third strategy in terms of what's there. So one of those is the child poverty rate. One of those is continuing the direct enrollment to college, 2 and 4 year. Yes, the per capita income's in there, but you see too a congestion index and how many people are traveling alone in their cars. It's holistic, it's real, it's very much about the fact that they want to keep pushing and they want to keep making their community better all of the time. You know, I had a woman one time in a county south of Atlanta, and we were midway through the process. She was on the steering committee. We were sitting around the table, and we were halfway through or so, and she raised her hand and said, "Mr. Holliday, who's going to do all this work?" I thought she understood what the game was and that she was in the tent and that she had to do the work. The same woman 15 minutes later raised her hand, "Mr. Holliday, when is this going to be over?" And I said, "Ma'am, how long are you planning to live?" Building a great place is a life's work, and that's what I want you to think about as we go forward here. We are only at the beginning of this. As you can see from the chart of where we are and how we started, it will take us through the spring and into the summer to get completed. But the fact is that this steering committee is committed to this, and they want to move ahead, and they're going to work hard at it, and they're going to need your help because, as I said, it's very clearly a team sport. In my career, I've had the pleasure of having staffs from 3 to 350. I have asked each of those staffs never to say 2 things to me, and I'm going to ask you the same thing, that over these next number of months, don't say these 2 things. Here's the first one. And here's the second one. Well, maybe you can get it right this time. The fact is that making mistakes is part of this, that trying and being risky and doing things and then going back and doing them better is what it's all about. A couple of years ago, I was fortunate to attend a speech at dinner with Colin Powell. Before the dinner, we were having a reception, and he came in the side door, and I was standing there with my wife having a glass of wine. And the secretary saw my Navy wings, and he came up to me and he asked me about my military service. Now here's the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of State, asking me about my military service. My staff finds this hard to believe, but I was speechless. I said something about the airplanes I'd flown and where I'd been and this, that, and the other. I subsequently, not only did he make a wonderful talk that evening, but I've read his biography, I've read his books. He went to public school in Brooklyn. He went to the City College of New York. He believes that public education is the only and top priority for this nation, that we must do everything we can there. At the end of 2012, he wrote a book called It Worked for Me in Life and Leadership. It's the story of corporals and privates and kings and queens and everybody. It made me laugh and made me cry. It's a wonderful piece. One of the things he said in that book has everything to do with what you're doing here, and it's called Champions. And here's what he said: no good idea simply succeeds because it's a good idea. Good ideas must have champions, people willing to believe in them, to push for them, to fight for them, to gain adherence and other champions and press until they succeed. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what this is all about. You need to be a champion for this region. You need to work hard for South Shore and know that it can be better even tomorrow than it is today. Thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank you, Mac, for those terrific comments and insights. Really a pleasure to be working with you and your team. As Mac stated, this is a team sport, and we have a long way to go. Once again, we are at the very beginning of a several-month process towards developing a consensus regarding our opportunities, our challenges, and the solutions related to those. In the end, the economic development plan that we developed for the South Shore, that all of us will create here in this room and outside this room, will serve as a roadmap for many years to come. And with a new governor about to be elected, and with the assistance of mayors Tom Koch, Joe Sullivan, Sue Kay, and others, our timing just couldn't be better. And also, because of the economic forces that Mac mentioned, and the fact that the cost of doing nothing is high, doing something now is an absolute imperative. So once again, I want to thank you for your time and attention in being here, and thank you in advance for all of your assistance over the next several months to come. Thanks again.